You know those moments when you think you're finally getting closer to the people who've always kept you at arm's length? That maybe, just maybe, all your hard work and good intentions are finally starting to mean something to them? I really believed I was there. My name's Daniel. I'm 36, and I've spent most of my adult life building homes and businesses with my own hands. I run a small contracting company here in Austin, Texas. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I've worked for everything I have, and I've done it without shortcuts or safety nets. My parents, on the other hand, live in a world of polished smiles and family name recognition. We've never exactly spoken the same language, but when they called and asked me to renovate their house, I thought, this is the moment. Maybe they're finally seeing me as someone worthy of respect. They weren't just handing me a job. They were offering a second chance. Or at least, that's how I chose to see it. I convinced myself that the project could fix more than just their old kitchen and outdated wiring. Maybe this was how we'd close the distance. So, I went all in. Turned down other clients, showed up early, stayed late. I handled everything personally, every decision, every detail. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to prove something. Not just to them, but to myself. I believed effort and loyalty would be enough. But what I didn't realize, what I couldn't allow myself to believe, was that this wasn't a bridge being built. It was a setup, a betrayal that would strip away every illusion I'd ever clung to about who my family really was. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I remember because it was hot, brutally hot, and I'd been hauling boxes of old junk from the attic to make room for the electricians. I was drenched in sweat, a little irritated, and trying to stay focused. I headed toward the garage, looking for an old circuit map my dad had supposedly left there. The door was cracked open, and I paused when I heard voices. My parents. At your first, I didn't think much of it. They talked behind closed doors all the time. But then I caught my name. That's when everything shifted. My mom's voice was sharp, almost mocking. She said something like, "Well, at least he's useful for something before we cut him off." My dad laughed. Not a small chuckle, but one of those low, bitter laughs. He followed it up with a comment about the paperwork being ready, that once the renovation was over, they'd move forward with the legal steps to reclaim the money they'd given me years ago to start my business. A loan, he called it. Not a gift, not support. A loan they never mentioned again. Until now. They were going to take me to court for it and leave me out of the will entirely. They talked about the optics, about how easy it would be to spin it, if I pushed back. My sister's name came up too. How she'd help manage me if things got messy. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stood there, listening to my own parents casually plotting to gut me financially and emotionally after everything I was doing for them, that moment. It was like a switch flipped. The illusions I'd held on to for years, the hope, the need for their approval, collapsed in an instant. I backed away quietly, heart pounding, face numb. That wasn't just betrayal. That was strategy. They'd planned this, and I'd walked right into it blind. Let me tell you a little more about who I am, because this whole story, the betrayal, the fight, the fallout, it doesn't make sense unless you understand where I come from. I didn't grow up in poverty, but I never felt like I belonged in the world my parents built. They were old money types, country club crowd, always chasing status and reputation. From a young age, I was different. I liked taking things apart, building stuff with my hands. I wasn't interested in their cocktail parties or the polished life they groomed my sister for. I wanted something real, something I could point to and say, I made that. By the time I was in my 20s, it was clear we weren't on the same path. I dropped out of college, started working in construction, and eventually scraped together enough to open my own company. They saw that as failure. To them, hard labor was a step down, not a choice. Every visit, every holiday, came with passive comments, how I could have done more, or settled for less. But I kept showing up, hoping they'd see that what I was building mattered. I thought if I proved I was successful in my own way, they'd finally look at me with pride instead of pity. That somehow I could buy my way into their respect with sweat and persistence. But it was never about what I built. It was about control. My dad was the kind of man who believed love had to be earned, on his terms. My mom played both sides. She'd hug me, say she was proud, then quietly echo whatever judgment he passed. My sister Laura was always the star. Ivy League, perfect smile, lived just 10 minutes away, and never got her hands dirty. She knew exactly how to stay in their good graces. Me? I was the outlier, the stubborn one, the one who never quite fit their mold. Still, I never cut ties. I always left the door open. Some part of me wanted to believe that family could be something, more than just shared blood and awkward dinners. I wanted to believe there was still room to repair what had broken. That's why I said yes to the renovation. That's why I showed up, tools in hand, heart on my sleeve. Not for the money, not for recognition. For the chance to be seen, not just as their son, but as someone who mattered. Someone worth keeping. Growing up in that house was like living in a museum. Everything was polished, curated, and off limits. Emotions weren't welcome unless they were neatly packaged. You didn't talk about feelings, you performed. My dad ran the family like a boardroom. Respect meant obedience, and love felt more like leverage. He was never violent, never loud. He didn't need to be. All it took was a glance, a few carefully chosen words, and you'd feel 2 inches tall. He had this way of reminding you that you weren't quite enough, that anything you did right was just the minimum expected. My mom was the softer face of the same system. She smiled more, touched your arm when she spoke, used words like sweetheart and, of course. But she knew how to cut just as deep. Her approval was slippery. You'd get just enough of it to keep chasing, but never enough to feel safe. She'd compliment me in public, then undermine me in private. She had this way of making you feel like a guest in your own family. If my dad was the judge, she was the silent jury, always watching, always waiting to deliver her verdict when it counted most. She'd sigh during my stories, check the time mid-conversation, gently suggest I keep my head down. Then there was Laura, the perfect daughter. Smart, charming, endlessly agreeable. She did everything they wanted, exactly the way they wanted it. She didn't just meet expectations, she anticipated them. And in return, they handed her everything. She didn't have to ask. While I was learning to stretch every dollar to buy my first set of tools, Laura was getting her third emergency car. She didn't mock me openly, but there was a tone, this subtle condescension, like she was the adult, and I was the one who still hadn't figured life out. She played the part so well, sometimes I wondered if she even realized how much damage she helped cause. What hurt the most wasn't their wealth or their approval games. It was the silence. The way no one stood up for me, ever. Every time I tried to speak my truth, the room got colder. I became the one who always made things tense. The black sheep. The complication. So I learned to keep my mouth shut, to play nice, to swallow the bitterness. I thought that if I just gave enough, they'd eventually see me, understand me. But that understanding never came. And now I realize it was never supposed to. When they asked me to take on the renovation, I said yes without hesitation. Not because I needed the job, I didn't. Business was steady, and the money they offered was below my usual rate, but it felt like a door cracking open. An unspoken invitation to reconnect. I told myself this was my shot at finally earning a seat at the table. Not through words, but through action. I believed that if I showed them what I could do, if I poured myself into this house, they'd finally see my worth without needing to be told. The project itself was massive. They wanted to gut the kitchen, redo the floors, open up the living room, modernize the entire layout. I didn't subcontract much. I wanted my hands on every beam, every nail. I treated it like I was building something sacred. I worked weekends. I turned down other projects. I even caught myself imagining family dinners at the new table I was crafting, where maybe, for the first time, they'd be proud to host me, to say, Daniel did this. It sounds naive now, but at the time, it felt real. Hope has a way of masking the obvious. Every day I was on site, I moved with this quiet urgency. Not just to meet deadlines, but to fix something deeper. There was something symbolic in tearing down old walls and rebuilding them better. It felt like a metaphor for what I was trying to do with our relationship. Strip away the resentment, reinforce the structure, lay down something new. I told myself they saw it too. My mom would drop by occasionally with coffee. My dad even nodded in approval once while checking the custom cabinetry. Those small moments fed the illusion that we were finally making progress. Even their neighbors started to notice, asking about the upgrades, complimenting the craftsmanship. It all seemed to suggest I was finally being recognized. Looking back, it's painful how much I believed, how much I wanted to believe. I thought I was doing more than construction. I thought I was repairing history. But the truth is, they never saw the renovation the way I did. To them, it was just another transaction. One more thing to manage and manipulate. I was investing my heart. They were calculating leverage. That disconnect, I didn't see it until it was too late. I thought I was building a bridge. Turns out, I was laying the foundation for my own betrayal. That night after the garage, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word I'd heard. I felt sick, not just from the betrayal but from how deep I'd let myself believe something different was possible. I kept thinking, how did I not see this coming? How many signs had I ignored because I wanted to believe in a version of them that never existed? I'd spent years trying to fix something that wasn't broken. It was working exactly as they wanted it to. I was the only one playing a different game. By morning, the sadness gave way to something sharper. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to confront them with emotion. That's what they expected. Some meltdown they could dismiss as overreaction. No. If they wanted to treat this like business, I'd respond in kind. That's when I called Jason. He's an old friend from high school, now a lawyer, someone I trust. I laid everything out. The so-called loan, the renovation, the overheard conversation. He listened, then said, "You have more power than you think." He explained how a mechanic's lien works. Since I hadn't been paid in full for the work, I had the right to file one. It would freeze the property, stop any refinancing or sale until the debt was settled. Legally, I could also contest the alleged loan. There was no contract, no repayment schedule. Just a vague memory of a helping hand they'd offered when I was starting out. We started documenting everything: texts, emails, purchase orders, labor hours. I had receipts for every nail, every gallon of paint, and I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. The shift was immediate. I went from feeling powerless to having a plan. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave it shape, turned it into something I could act on. I stopped going to the house. I let the paperwork speak. Filing the lien was both terrifying and liberating. I knew what it meant. I knew it would trigger a storm. But I also knew it was the first time in my life I was setting a boundary they couldn't ignore. This wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. If they wanted to treat me like a contractor, fine. But I was going to act like one, with rights, with limits, with dignity. And this time, I wasn't backing down. The moment the lien was filed, the silence broke. My dad called first, didn't even ask how I was, just launched straight into a lecture. He said I was being irrational, vindictive, ungrateful, claimed I was embarrassing the family and ruining their reputation. He kept using words like overreaction and misunderstanding, as if I hadn't heard them clear as day, plotting to erase me. When I didn't back down, his tone shifted. Suddenly it wasn't just disappointment. It was threat. "This could get messy," he said. I told him it already was. That was the last time I picked up the phone for him. Then came my mother. She left voicemails with that carefully rehearsed tremble in her voice. She talked about how hurt she was, how she never expected me to lash out this way. Said things like, "After all we've done for you," and "You're breaking this family apart." That one hit me, because for so long I believed I was the one holding it together. But really, I was just the one bending until I broke. Her messages weren't about reconciliation. They were layered with guilt, not grace. A performance I'd seen 100 times before, except now, I wasn't applauding. Her tears weren't for healing. They were for show. Laura got involved. Next, she texted me one night, said we needed to talk things through. She always played the mediator. the one who tried to float above the conflict while subtly steering it in their favor. We met for coffee. She kept her voice calm, concerned, asked me if I was sure I wasn't overreacting. Said Mom was crying. Dad was stressed, the house was in chaos. I told her I had no regrets. That's when she changed gears. Said I was hurting the people who'd supported me in their own way, and that maybe I'd misunderstood the garage conversation. Gaslighting wrapped in compassion. Classic Laura. Always diplomatic. Always dangerous. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to get ahead of it. Every call, every message, every visit wasn't about mending. It was about control. They wanted me to fold. They thought if they pushed the right emotional buttons, I'd cave like I always had. But I didn't. I let the silence return, this time on my terms. For the first time in my life, I chose peace over proximity. And with every ignored call, every unanswered text, I felt stronger. They were playing the old game. I was done playing. The legal side moved slowly, but every step was a reminder that I wasn't powerless anymore. The lien caused real trouble for them. They couldn't finalize a refinance deal they'd been counting on, and suddenly their precious home wasn't just a project. It was a liability. Their lawyer reached out, then another. But I didn't flinch. Jason handled the communication, and I stayed quiet. For once, I let someone else speak for me, with documents, deadlines, and legal terms that didn't bend to guilt trips. Eventually, they settled, quietly of course. They paid out the full amount, including all the documented labor and materials, and dropped the talk of the loan. There was no apology, no conversation, no olive branch. Just a wire transfer and a silence that stretched further than anything we'd known before. But that silence, it didn't sting this time. It was clean. It was final. It felt like standing up from a table I'd begged to sit at for years, only to realize the meal was never meant for me. Winning legally wasn't about the money. It was about acknowledgement. It meant I hadn't imagined the imbalance, that my work, my time, my boundaries, they mattered. I started to feel something I hadn't in years. Not triumph, but clarity. The clarity that comes when you stop hoping for something toxic to heal. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. There's a strange kind of peace that settles in when you finally accept that some relationships are better left behind. That letting go doesn't mean failure. It means survival. The hardest part wasn't the legal fight. It was grieving people who are still alive. Realizing they'll never be who I needed them to be. That they might never understand the depth of the wound they helped shape. And even if they did, they'd never admit it. The version of me that once waited for validation, he's gone, buried under years of silence, apologies that never came, and truths that were never welcomed. And yet, in that space, something new started to grow. A version of myself that didn't revolve around their approval. I started waking up with more ease. Work felt lighter. Friends noticed a shift in me. I laughed more. I breathed deeper. It wasn't that the pain disappeared. It just didn't run the show anymore. That chapter of my life closed without a big scene. No dramatic confrontation. No last-minute redemption arc. Just quiet resolution. And in that quiet, I found something I never expected. A beginning. A new foundation. Built not on permission, but on truth. After everything, the hardest part wasn't what I lost. It was figuring out who I was without the chase. Without the constant effort to be seen, heard, accepted. When that noise finally stopped, it was almost disorienting. I had all this space, all this quiet, and for a while, I didn't know what to do with it. But slowly, I started filling it. Not with old patterns, not with bitterness, but with new choices. Real ones. Ones I made for me. I poured more of myself into my business. Not because I had something to prove, but because I loved the work. The simplicity of it. The clarity. Materials don't lie. Wood bends or it breaks. Walls either hold or they fall. There's no double meaning in a solid frame. I found peace in that. And I started to notice how much lighter everything felt when I wasn't carrying the invisible weight of trying to earn someone's love. I even took on a few pro bono projects for people who reminded me of who I used to be. People trying to rebuild. I also let myself get closer to the people who'd always been there. Quietly, consistently. Jason, who didn't just give me legal advice, but showed up with beer and silence when that's all I could handle. A couple of old friends, who stuck by me even when I ghosted them for months. Clients who sent thank you notes and remembered my birthday. These weren't dramatic relationships, but they were honest, real. For the first time, I started thinking about what family could look like if you built it on trust, not guilt. On shared time, not bloodlines. I stopped chasing apologies. Stopped rehearsing what I'd say if they ever came around. Because the truth is, I didn't need anything more from them. Not anymore. What I needed was already in front of me. A life I'd built with my own hands, and the freedom to live it without pretending. There was no big moment of transformation, no sudden epiphany. Just small, quiet choices that added up to something solid. Healing doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it's just choosing not to answer the phone. Sometimes it's standing in the home you paid for, the one you designed, and realizing you're finally safe. Not because they made it right, but because you did. I didn't fix my family. I outgrew them. And in that growth I found peace. And that peace, it was mine. Finally. If you've made it this far, maybe you see a part of yourself in this story. Maybe you've spent years trying to earn someone's approval, waiting for recognition that never came. Or maybe you're still hoping that one day, if you just work hard enough, love them enough, bend far enough, they'll finally meet you halfway. I get it. I really do. But here's what I've learned. Some people won't meet you halfway, because they were never walking towards you to begin with. There's no ribbon-cutting moment when you realize your worth. It happens slowly, in the silence, in the choices, in the days you stop explaining yourself, in the mornings you wake up and don't check your phone for their messages, in the nights you sleep better because you've drawn a line and kept it. That's where power starts. In the boundaries no one taught us we were allowed to make. The kind that say, I matter, even if you don't agree. It's easy to feel like cutting off toxic family makes you cold or heartless. That's the lie they feed you. The real truth? Walking away from people who constantly hurt you isn't cruelty. It's clarity. It's love turned inward. You don't owe anyone access to your peace just because they share your DNA. Family isn't blood. Family is behavior. It's the people who show up when it's inconvenient. The ones who see you, not as a pawn in their image, but as a whole person deserving of love without strings attached. I built a house for people who only saw me as a tool. But in the rubble of that experience, I built something better. A life. A real one. One with love and laughter and respect that doesn't have to be earned with sacrifice. I stopped asking, why don't they love me, and started asking, do I love me? That shift changed everything. And that's what I hope you find too, your shift. So if you're standing where I stood, heart heavy, wondering whether you should hold on or let go, let me say this clearly. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to start over. And when you do, you'll be shocked at how much lighter the world feels without the weight of someone else's silence. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone. You are already enough. And if no one's ever told you that before, let me be the first. You deserve a life that feels like yours.